Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of the Catholic Catechesis podcast. That introduction could have gone better, but we'll stick with it. I have here two of my very good friends slash ex-roommates. I think I can say that. Patrick and Joe. Why don't you say hi, guys?
Hi, this is Patrick.
And this is Joe.
So, why don't you guys introduce yourself a little bit? Tell me more about where you guys are from. What's your deal, so listeners know.
Sure. My full name is Patrick Andrews. I'm from Irving, Texas. Where the University of Dallas is located. I'm a classics and philosophy double major. I'm a junior at UD, and I think that's basically covers it.
I'm Joe Boyle. I'm from St. Paul and in Minnesota and there now. And I am a junior English major.
Not a lot else besides that, yeah.
Well, that's pretty much it.
That's how we define ourselves in college, our majors and our hometowns. Um, yeah, quarantine has us all, unfortunately, in different places, but we've come together to do this regardless for everybody. Um, so as you guys probably already know, um, this podcast is split into three sections: experience, opinion, and suggestions. So we'll run through all of these sections in a prompt and easy manner, so that we can all get back to our quarantine lifestyles of eating countless amounts of snacks and spending ungodly amounts of time on our electronics. Um, all right. So the first one, experience, deals with kind of your personal experience with catechesis. So to start it off, well, where did you guys receive your religious education?
So I went to a local Catholic school from fifth grade to senior year, run by Cistercian monks. And so that's where I received the majority of my religious education, I'd say, in religion and theology classes there, mostly from the Cistercian monks who all studied the priesthood, and so we're pretty good academically on theology. In addition, I received my first communion at a local parish, Holy Family, and then of course I received different sources of religious education from my parents, and now from UD,
Mm-hmm.
a couple of theology classes there.
Right. How about you, Joe?
So I've been in Catholic school my entire life. I was in the parish school until I was there through sixth grade, and then I went to a private Catholic high school. So most of my catechesis was from my elementary school, and then leading up to confirmation, I did catechesis with my dad. He's a theology professor. Um, so I got that section from him, and then have had religion classes since and theology classes at UD. Um, so yeah, that's my deal.
Right. Um, what's a kind of a nice little memory that you guys have from your experience in catechesis? Anything that sticks out, something special you learned, something funny that happened.
Um, I remember receiving unconsecrated hosts for the first time when I was preparing for my first communion. That was pretty fun. I remember it tasting a lot worse than I thought it would. I remember, like, you as a little kid, you always want to go up in line and get and then
Right.
receive communion with everyone else, and out of curiosity almost. And so I was kind of disappointed the first time I had it. How much I disliked the taste of the communion wafers and the wine. So yeah, that's a funny memory I have.
How about you, Joe? That's funny.
Well, mine is probably from getting catechesis from my dad. That's a pretty good memory. We would, I think, after mass every Sunday, we were using the Baltimore Catechism, and we would go through the set of questions we had done last time as a review, and then work on the next few. He'd explain them, and I'd have to remember them for the sort of quiz kind of thing the
Right.
next week. And we did that for, I don't know, a couple months. It was pretty fun.
It's pretty fun, yeah. I mean, I think any experience with your parents, especially when they're teaching you like that, is pretty fun.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it's better than being taught by some volunteer you've never met and you don't know.
No, for well, I mean, I guess it has its upside. It just has there's not a lot going into it, so their expectations are low there. I can't say the same about your father. I mean, you expect a lot from your dad, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
So, what was the style of the teaching like in your respective formations? I mean, Joe, I think I can probably infer this a little bit, but uh, you said your dad used the Baltimore Catechism a lot. Is there anything else that he used kind of in his education and the way that he taught you?
I don't think so. I think it was pretty much like he would go through the questions and I mean, he used his background to explain them when necessary. Um, we didn't really, at least I don't really remember using sort of preset programs at all, even in school, although we may have. Um, I think mostly it was more sort of teachers got to choose their own curriculum,
Mm-hmm.
figure out what they would teach. Usually there was a textbook that we didn't use very often. Um,
Right. Mm-hmm. How about you, Patrick?
So my religious education at Cistercian, at least, was very uh, in the house, I guess, in house.
Mm-hmm.
They generated their own curriculum. The textbooks that we used were written by Cistercian monks of the same abbey, um, and so it was kind of the idea was they had an integrated experience from fifth
Mm-hmm.
grade to senior year that would try to get you everything you needed to know to be a good practicing Catholic. Um, it tended to be pretty academically focused, so most of these people had studied for at least their masters, if not more, in theology, often in Rome. So it was a pretty rigorous environment. I mean, Cistercian's pretty academically oriented anyway, and so that was kind of the religious education I received. Um, it was built by people who were very familiar with the school and very familiar with the theology. So it was really nice in that respect.
Yeah, right. That's pretty interesting, actually. I've never heard of like a program that has its own textbooks written by the people that are teaching the program. So I'd imagine they definitely knew what they were talking about. Um, all right. And last question on this section. Do you guys think that your catechesis and the form that it was given to you in has improved your faith life?
That's a good question. I think it's interesting what kind of role catechism can play in improving faith life in general, um, especially given kind of like the environment I came out of,
Mm-hmm.
which was like very academically focused, and so it's like very much engaging the mind. Maybe not like personal investment wasn't as adequately um, expressed, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I guess the strength of catechesis program is it's kind of about the prerequisites. I mentioned earlier, it's like it's supposed to give you the things you need to be a good practicing Catholic. And unless you know the basic doctrines of the faith, the basic morals,
Mm-hmm.
um, then there's no way really to advance in the faith, I think.
Right.
And so it was kind of, I would, I'd say it got me halfway there being to be a better practicing Catholic. It definitely engaged my mind and gave me what I needed to move further, but perhaps didn't always push me to be absolutely a better practicing Catholic, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I've heard it said that like I think the Catholic faith is a lot of a dialogue between the mind and the heart, and it's like trying to connect what maybe the mind learns to what the heart believes. Um, yeah, and I think you touched on it is like you had a really like stout academic formation, so you knew a lot about it, but it was kind of maybe a little difficult to translate that into more of like a personal faith um, and belief. And I think that's a step that everybody needs to take, just depending on like what is kind of developed first, I guess, in a sense, because everybody gets to the I think those points differently. Joe, what about you?
yeah, I'd say it's sort of similar. I'd say it was very foundational where I mean, thinking about it, trying to think about ways that, it's changed my life, it's sort of hard to find those. I think it definitely
Mhm.
has. And I think I have a very strong base, of doctrine, of yeah, the things you need to know, as Patrick was saying. And so it really has affected my faith life, but I think it's um, because it's so foundational, it's perhaps less obvious some of the ways
Hmm.
compared to, you know, in college, the formation I'm receiving and stuff like that is much more clearly affecting a change.
Hmm.
Um, but
Right.
that's because I've been very aware of my condition before, my condition now. Whereas, you know, when you're
Hmm.
10, you sort of are less aware of those things.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's definitely much easier to see a change later on in life because there's more to see. Like there's more evidence of the past, right? Like you already have that case, and now you can see like this is different than it was a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I'm sure. Actually, I something I did want to touch on once I heard about the fact that you did a lot of this in Rome. Do you kind of think the setting of where you were educated also kind of impacted you a little bit?
Yeah, I think probably. It at least um yeah, I don't know. I struggle to pinpoint exactly what, but I think Rome is very like you're surrounded in this culture, in the art much more than you are in the US. Um
Hmm.
I sat in on an art history class in 7th grade, and that was very like they
Hmm.
were talking about the religious themes, the religious aspects, um, and you know how the art mirrors the religious history. So I think again in sort of an intellectual way that um, is perhaps a unique
Hmm.
and also was a helpful thing for me at that point.
Yeah. Um, I mean, Rome is awesome. I think we've all been there. We're all there
Yeah.
together for in a semester, so I think we can all say Rome is awesome. And at least for me, when I was there, it definitely had an impact on my faith life, just because you're kind of there, right? In this, like you said, a different place, a different culture. But not, I think not only that, it's the kind of gravity of Rome as a setting
Yeah.
in and of itself, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah. I hope everybody that's like has a chance to go to Rome someday because it's awesome. Um, all right, thanks for your answers on that section, guys. Let's move on to the next one. His opinion. We're gonna try to draw out the deeply held views that you have that you've never shared with anybody else about the church. Um, we're looking for spicy stuff, right? So the first kind of question is just kind of very basic. Do you believe that this is an area the church needs to improve? Why or why not?
Did you specify this? You mean catechesis in general?
Catechesis, yeah, catechesis. Sorry about that.
Uh, Interesting question. I guess probably there are areas in theory that need to be expanded upon, and what we're teaching.
Mhm,
Those are probably beyond any any lay thinker.
mhm,
I mean, non theologian when I say lay. In terms of practice, um, perhaps better formation of the catechizers himself would be helpful. So Joe and I both teach catechism at a local parish, St. Luke's, um, and we know that you know we know what to teach, generally
mhm,
speaking, but how to teach it, what methods are effective, how to approach our students. Those are all areas I think uh, we could grow in. I know
mhm.
I can definitely be a better mentor or teacher or all these different roles that a catechizer, uh, catechist. I don't know what the term is there.
But either or.
Um, uh, what there's so many roles that we could potentially play, and I think we are lacking some of the tools to pursue that. But I mean, everything is already there. We have the catechism, so
Mhm.
I guess if there's areas to improve, it would be in improving the catechizers themselves.
Joe, what's your opinion?
Yeah, I think I basically second that. I mean, catechesis does seem very important and something that is also in many ways the way you do it is dependent on the circumstances, and so it can always be improved to some extent. Um, but yeah, I liked Patrick's point that we have the catechism, and that really is very foundational, or should be very foundational to what the catechists are doing.
Mm-hmm.
So in that way, it's not like there's sort of these big glaring holes or failures that we need to work on.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, working on the catechists themselves, working on always improving it, even in small ways.
Mm-hmm. Patrick, you mentioned something that I found interesting. You said that the catechist has a potential to serve much more than just like a teaching role, right? Like a mentorship as somebody that kind of walks alongside you in your faith journey. Um, do you think that's an appropriate role for a catechist to play, as in the United States specifically, since we all live here, right?
Yeah, great question. I think um, catechists should um, be open to the role of mentoring students who need it. I mean, with some of these students, it's clear they haven't received a lot of information in their lives. And so, if we're the only options for them, we should be available for that. Before class, if they come early, they can just chat with us in the classroom if they have questions about the faith. But mostly what I meant by that actually wasn't like one-to-one contact or like, kind of like a personal relationship. I meant more like being an example.
Mm-hmm.
I think in some ways the fact that Joe and I are volunteers who every week show up and try to teach these kids who, half of them don't really care, if we're cynical about it. But that alone is a way of mentoring, I think, right? That like we show up, we care about our faith, we talk about it very respectfully.
Right.
We want to pass it on to the next generation, and then we go to mass together. We try our best to, tell them how to behave in mass, reprimand them when they fail in that, and try to be good mass goers ourselves. So I think that's what I meant mostly when I said that
Mm-hmm.
we have a role, a capability of mentoring, even if it doesn't always happen. I mean, it should
Right.
happen, at least on some level.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think at least in our situation where it's the two of us and 25, 30 kids who we see for 3 hours every Sunday,
Mm-hmm.
something like that. Um, that one-on-one mentoring role we can't really fill very well.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
just not really practical, and I think um, also because we don't have any training for that, there's like we are not the best people to fill that role.
Mm-hmm.
But that I think it is there. I like Patrick's what he said about being open to it.
Mm-hmm.
If you
Okay.
see the need and you can do it, yeah, I definitely think that is a role that a catechist can play.
Right. I really value your perspective on this, guys. There's not a lot of other people that have like been roped into leading a class in this sense, especially at our age, 20 somethings don't know anything about anything. um, all right, so actually continuing on that theme, let's turn to some quotes from church documents, specifically St. Augustine's first catechetical instruction. Um, in your own experience, do you think that the quote that he says in this book, he says, "We learn in them what we teach," referencing the role of the catechists and the students is kind of maybe reflecting back a deeper understanding of the material to the catechist himself. Um, do you guys kind of agree with that?
Yeah, I think it would be wise to agree with St. Augustine in most respects. And
Yeah.
this one doesn't seem to be an exception to that. Um, so I think it makes a lot of sense to kind of grow in grow in knowledge of the faith, grow in devotion to the faith through education. Um, I think also you kind of undergo the same process as these kids, as you're teaching them, you kind of like, it's kind of a chance to rediscover the faith that they're discovering at the same time.
Mhm.
Uh, you see like as they grow in learning, you kind of get to experience that for yourself. To speak very ideally about it.
Mhm.
But I think, practically speaking, it's really important to um, you learn how to speak clearly when you're teaching cynical middle schoolers, basically. I'll tell a story about this with Father Rock, the Cistercian monk who actually he wrote all the textbooks or most of the textbooks that we use for religious education as Cistercian. He has a story about, so he taught at UD and at the prep school.
Yeah.
And so he has a story about how he learned to write clear theology, not from his graduate students at UD, but from the prep schoolers, the middle school and high school cynical boys there. Because when you're talking to a graduate student, you're trying to teach them theology, which they really place a premium on like the right the big words, right? The very flowery expressions, kind of like very technical language. That's really what the grad student is looking for, but the prep schooler is not willing to accept this kind of like diffusive mode of theology. They want very clear instruction. They'll object to any kind of abstract language. They want it very clear, very simple, or else they'll try to tear it apart because they're kind of cynical in that respect, right? They're still trying to understand their faith, and in some ways, working against it, right? That's the teenage phase in some ways. And so I think that's really true. It rings true in this quote of Augustine that you kind of learn to speak clearly about the faith by teaching it to people who maybe aren't always receptive to it, or even are receptive to hearing it. You learn about it by teaching it.
Yeah.
Joey, what do you think on it?
I also think that when you're answering their questions, the questions that they have or the objections that they raise, that's also a really key area of growth for the catechist, because you believe these things, and they make some objection, they have some question, and that it's not it's not valid, it's not a reason not to believe, but you need to figure out how you deal with that. And then, as Patrick said, you have to figure out how to explain it to them, which can be difficult. Yeah, so that would be my one addition. I think definitely you can the catechist can learn from the people they're teaching.
Going back to that point you just mentioned, I think it's very common for especially as we've mentioned, people that are not as well formed, especially young people in this day and age, that don't have a very good, even basic understanding of church teaching or prayers or anything like that, that we run into misunderstandings and stuff. And the questions can reflect that, right? Like they don't really get it right off the bat. St. Augustine kind of touches on this, and he tells us he says to avoid arguing when we're answering questions. He says instead to refute with what has been foretold by tradition, scripture, right? I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, that's interesting. I do sort of like at least what I take to be what Augustine's saying, which is, you don't want to try and either make yourself the authority on these things, or be, sort of aggressive, like attack the person, because that's all those things are going to drive them away. But if you are using church teaching, which is going to be much more reliable than you yourself, and you're really trying to work with them, they see that you respect them, that you are taking them seriously. I think that's going to be much more effective than trying to argue with them to be bombastic.
Patrick, anything on the matter?
I don't think I have anything to add to that.
Okay.
I said it all.
Yeah. It seems that you did, Joe. We'll leave that. Joe had more to say than Patrick. It's a little note I'm going to put down on my notes.
We're of one mind at this point, Joe and I. So
Right.
there's no need.
Very synchronous. All right. The next kind of thing is I wanted to talk a little bit about the history of catechesis, and I'll give you all a bit of background on what I'm talking about specifically. And we see in the history of the church and in the history of teaching, we have three like stages or phases of development within the church. Obviously, in the early church, we have a small community, so the catechesis was focused much more on making sure that everybody that wanted to enter was entering, one, for the right reasons, and two, got a very good understanding of what it meant to be in this community. We can point to St. Cyril of Jerusalem. His set of 23 lectures mandated 40 days of penance before you could start, entering this program, or I guess, I don't know if we can call it a program if we're talking about like 200s catechesis, but and then he would go on to have each session consist of an exorcism, a reading from scripture, a homily on scripture, and then prayer. So this was very in depth. Like this was basically an explanation of everything that the church knew up until this point in each of these lectures, right? Now, in medieval times, as the church grows and as the world expands as a whole, it's not that people are less concerned about the quality of education in catechesis, but that because there's so many more people now that have to be converted and have to learn about the faith, it's a switch more towards making sure people know the basics, and then outsourcing the rest of that, like deeper catechesis, deeper understanding of the faith, to outside sources, one of which was primarily the home, right? A very, very huge emphasis on home catechesis, making sure that parents taught their children. Now, these two phases of development lead into the third and last one, which is for maybe at the risk of generalizing this third phase, I think we can call it the Vatican II kind of phase of development, which is where we try to take the best of both of these phases and try to synthesize them. The RCIA process, I think, is the best example. Is bringing back that a lot of the waiting periods beforehand, like in the early church, but it's also open in its own way to making sure that we can get as many people that want to know about the faith, and we can teach them about the faith. So after that long explanation, my question for you guys is: do you sympathize more with one of these phases of development, and are you of the opinion that the church should kind of go back to emphasizing one over the other, or do we continue on the road that Vatican II has set us out on, which is trying to combine these two in some way, shape, or form for catechesis as a whole?
Yeah, those are interesting historical approaches that I guess I would like to think about further. But initially, I would say that it seems like the medieval option, that basics are taught in catechesis and the rest is done by your parents. I would kind of even argue a kind of like a reversal of that. So the basics should be taught by the parents, and then you get, further formation from catechists. I think Joe and I run into a lot of, kind of lackluster formation in some of the people we have in class, to the point where some of them don't even know their basic prayers. And that seems like something you should just learn, as a young child, as you're learning to imitate your parents, as you see them pray, as you hear them pray. You just use naturally those words become part of your vocabulary. Like that to me seems the optimal way for, religious development to start is having catechesis. Basic stuff done by the parents, and then you move on and you receive more specific, higher level formation from, catechists, professionals, volunteers. I mean, people who know the faith, have studied it at least to some degree, and then that way you have a model where the catechists have something to build off of,
right?
And so they're not trying to catch everyone up at the same level. And then also the parents are freed from having to like really, really, just charge through
Mm-hmm.
difficult theology, or even have to work through a lot of these religious questions that may not be able to do.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
not everyone's dad is a theology professor, I guess. Is I would give there.
Well, one could hope, but yes, the reality obviously is of of a different tact than that. Joe, what do you think?
Yeah, that was an awesome point. Um, I think I think what we're doing now is probably um, the the best for the situation.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is really good where you have both the RCIA, which does seem a little bit more because the people that do it are choosing to do it is a
Mm-hmm.
little bit more select.
Right.
It can be deeper,
Mm-hmm.
but then also having a sort of general catechesis to just get people into the faith, have
Mm-hmm.
them know the basics that they need to know, making sure they're baptized, they have the sacraments. That is very, very important. Um, I think I would probably, if I had to choose one of the older ones, I'd probably choose the more medieval notion just because
Mm-hmm.
seems a little bit more practical to me
Right.
on sort of a broad level. But um, I think we're doing a fairly good. I think the way we have it set up now
Mm-hmm.
is
It's really good.
a good way of doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. I.
I guess I also really like Patrick's emphasis on the family. I think that's really important, especially nowadays when there are just
Well,
so many, at least where we are, so many people who need catechesis, and um, we could use more teachers. And I think pu- moving some of the catechesis to the family
mhm.
increases teachings, increases the number of teachers just by including parents. Um,
Right. I can think of one objection that we've discussed in my class to that kind of method. Not against moving the like catechesis to the home, which I think is a practical thing, right? Kind of shifting a lot of the like the responsibility the church has of teaching nowadays and telling like the parents, hey, like you should know this, so you should teach it to the kids. Um, I think the primary objection to that we discussed is that a lot of parents don't know that. Now we can't go back and undo the fact that a lot of parents maybe did not get good catechesis in their own childhoods. But I think something that we can change is that we can provide catechesis in some like maybe limited form to parents. I don't know. What do you guys think about that? Is that a practical thing that we can do now?
Yeah, I think it's totally something we should try to do. Is and catechesis is not something that you should consider dogma confirmation, which I think a lot of people consider it to be. It should be something that you do your whole life.
Mm-hmm.
So ideally, yes, there are church programs that help catechesis for adults. Um,
Mm-hmm.
we all forget things. We all need to continually grow in the infinitely deep mysteries, right? So there should always be space for catechesis for adults, if possible. An interesting thing, actually, that really has a lot of bearing here is because of the situation where we can't have class anymore. What we have to do is put together packets to send to parents, who in turn will teach them. The idea is they'll teach the material in those packets to their kids at home. And this seems to me kind of like a way, we're kind of forced back into really involving the parents because you see how much catechists are limited. I mean, we're already limited to 3 hours a week, um, and now we don't have any hours at all. So what can we do? It has to be through the parents.
Right.
And so that's kind of interesting that that's kind of the course that we're taking. And it seems like the only viable one because the parents are the only ones that are available.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully that this program will not only help the students but also help the parents like see like, oh, like, what my kid is doing is valuable.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's something that I wish I could grow in, and then maybe they'll
Mm-hmm.
investigate what programs are available for them.
Joe, you have anything on the matter?
Not really. I also think that, I mean, one of the practical issues with sort of family catechesis is that a lot of families, I think, would, you uh, like, parents are very busy. And I think this is a worthy thing for them to give time to. But
Mm-hmm.
you wonder whether just, having classes that they send their children to uh, perhaps makes it easier for them to, choose to have catechists or choose to have their children catechized. Um, yeah, it seems like something that needs to be there needs to be options. I don't think there's a blanket solution for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Even family to family, it really depends. So
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely true. A lot of families, it's not maybe that they don't want to, like, take time out of their lives to help their kids learn. I'm sure that if you put it that way, it's like, you're helping your kids learn more about something is really important. A lot of parents would be like, yeah, absolutely. How do I do that? But I think it's the practical side of it is, maybe a lot of people just can't. They have so much work to do. Their lives are so busy that they just really can't stop and take that hour, maybe, um, because it can be that difficult for people.
yeah,
Um, all right, yeah, thank you guys. I really appreciate y'all's perspectives on that matter, especially as some people that have actually taught, and been in charge of a class. I think y'all's opinions really weigh pretty heavily there. Um, all right, on to the next and final section right here. So suggestion section. So you can play the role of Mr. Fix It, and fix what's wrong with whatever the church needs to do better. The first one is actually, I want to propose a bit of a suggestion to you guys and see if y'all, this is something you think we should do. Um, do you think that the church should require its catechizers to be trained in any sort of way, like a 6-week training program, let's say, as a starting off, in the teaching and not only the teachings of the faith, but teaching the faith, and so in that the emphasis on that being their own teaching ability, right? Like, kind of giving a bit of a crash course on how to handle a classroom, maybe. Um, or is that just kind of not a practical thing to expect people to follow through on in a position that they're probably volunteering for?
Yeah, I think Joe and I have often talked about needing this for ourselves, even. Um, I don't know how willingly we would have done the 6 week if there were a 6 week program,
Mm-hmm.
but we can definitely see that now that we would have benefited from it. Like we had a lot of trouble early on and still do in disciplining a classroom and keeping students attentive, making them care, making them take notes, making them behave in mass. Like there's a multitude of problems that we struggled with. And I'm sure there are people with experience who could have helped us kind of work through those issues. I think what ended up happening actually was that we kind of had to experiment week to week what worked, and so these poor students are like little guinea pigs, and we're like, okay, if I'm more aggressive and upfront about direct about how they're misbehaving, is that better? And they're like, okay, no, I just yelled at them, that was probably not helpful. Or like week to week you work through these different methods, and
Right.
um that could have been solved. Maybe 6 weeks is even too long. I mean, like if you had given me one class where it's like, okay, you have to be very you have to discipline, like that. Even the fact that we had to discipline or be very direct or you know um treat class super seriously was a lesson I wish I could have learned before the class started. Because you go in, you want to be the fun teacher, the teacher who's relatable, the teacher who you can, who people look up to. You have a lot of these kind of strange ambitions,
Mm-hmm.
and really, you should just reevaluate what you
Yeah.
want to be for these students, and a class on that would have been really helpful. So that I think that's kind
Yeah.
of
Mm-hmm.
that's my opinion on the matter.
Joe, what do you think?
yeah. I think that sort of learning how to teach, that is really important, and that can be done. Um, I mean, I think a lot of that is figuring out what works for you, but that can be done more quickly. Um, and I think there should be some way of making sure that the catechists know what to teach. I think, Patrick and I probably didn't need a specific class,
Mm-hmm.
um, because we've been learning about the faith our entire lives. We have the catechism. We can figure it out week to week. Um, but yeah, the realities of teaching would have been nice to know beforehand. And I think um, maybe for some people who have less of a handle on their faith but still really want to teach, to hand it on, it's important to them, um, having some class beforehand that really helps them know what they're going to teach before they get thrown into it. That could be really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think volunteers have their upsides and downsides. I've seen them both kind of in my time, kind of, I guess, going to youth group in my own parish. Our first youth minister was a volunteer, and our second one was better, and one was good, one was bad. Um, and the reasons for that, varied a lot more because volunteers can take their energy, right, and they can put it into actually getting good at whatever it is that they're trying to, put themselves up for. So you could have a volunteer that goes out and does this program and really takes it to heart, and it's like, yeah, this is really what I want to do. I want to do a good job for these students. On the other hand, you could have someone that volunteers for it, and their intentions are good, right? They want to teach, they want to be an example of the faith, but their talents are just not suited to this specific atmosphere. And as a result, they end up doing more harm than good, even though their intentions were to help out. Uh, so I think that's something that every parish should kind of weigh as they look for catechists to fill these spots, right? The second question here is what is any suggestion that you have as people that have kind of filled this role already for the church to increase its amount of teachers in catechesis?
That's a great question. And one that I don't think I have a super solid answer to, because, Joe and I have both, excuse me, Joe and I have both had friends who have heard about this opportunity and in the end kind of turned it down. And it was hard for us to see what could have changed their minds or how to recruit them properly or get them started. Joe and I were both also, I think, kind of reluctant at first, and it's interesting to look at what happens to us to see what ended up convincing us. Joe and I both, I think we had this friend who helped run some of the catechesis there, and he would approach us and he would say, what did he say? He said, "Oh, are you interested in teaching at St. Luke's? I don't need an answer right now, but just want to put it out there. There's a need. People need it for this." And Joe and I are both like, "Okay, that could be interesting. Let's try it out." And then as we tried it out, we kind of just made it part of a routine, and then eventually now we're just doing it all the time. And so I think that might be an interesting strategy, is to get teachers into the classroom, get people into the classroom just to see what it's like. To see the need, to see what they could do, to see, these students need education, and you can grow in providing it for them and provide it for them. So I think finding ways to experiment with short-term volunteers to try and turn them into long-term volunteers could be an interesting strategy.
Yeah, that's actually a really good suggestion. I'm thinking on the lines of student teachers, people that are going into teaching as a profession. They usually have to take a certain amount of time and do observational kind of help type period in an actual classroom. Um, I think for a lot of students, especially, I have a couple of friends that are aspiring to be teachers and have done this already. They've gone through that. That time can either make them really see oh, this is really what I'm being called to do in my life, or it can really change their minds and be like, yeah, this is not going to work out. Definitely not for me. It's a really good suggestion. Joe, you got anything on it?
Yeah, I have one quick thing before
Go ahead, Patrick.
Joe answers. And I was going to say that I think it also helps kind of deal with the excuses that people come up with. A lot of people say "Oh, I don't have the time. I'm a full-time student. I don't have time for volunteer work." Or people say "I don't have the ability." And once you show up and you realize it's not you hear the word catechesis and you think very grand thoughts, I think. But then you show up and you realize, no, this is basic stuff that I could do, and it's only 3 hours of my day. And because I've done it this Sunday and I've survived the week, there's no sense in my excuses don't stand up anymore. So that's another kind of positive side to this kind of strategy.
Yeah, really good point. Joe, anything to offer?
Yeah, I think Patrick and I are now even because I don't have anything to add. So
We're all balancing out here. All right. All right. We'll move on to the final question in this section. It's probably the most grandiose one as well. So we're going to put you guys in the seat of St. Peter for a day. Are there any changes that you're making as Pope for a day to improve Catholic catechesis? Or is it kind of not the Pope's role to do that? Should that be left more to kind of the parish or, or kind of dioceses?
I don't, at least right now, I don't see anything that um, the Pope, any sort of sweeping change that the Pope could make. Maybe there are. I don't see them. I think it is much more, at least in my mind, a local issue where um, priests, bishops who know their flock will be much more able to figure out the needs, figure out solutions to those needs, uh, and implement them than the Pope could. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think perhaps encouraging catechesis could be something that the Pope could do because people listen to the Pope and he has influence and authority. But I think more practical or detailed than that becomes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see much opportunity for that.
Patrick, any thoughts you have?
I think Joe made a really good point. Obviously, he'd be a very collegial pope, so that's good. Maybe someday, Joe. Um, but really, I like to say that, yeah, that's a really good point about, leave it to the diocese, leave it to the parish. And honestly, some of it even comes down to the classroom itself. One class is going to have different needs from another class, and you really have to be on the ground, knowing the students that you're teaching to know the needs of the community. For example, like our parish really, it's very Hispanic. Most of the students speak Spanish at home, and Joe and I kind of lack a lot of the vocabulary to kind of address that problem. And they lack some of the English vocabulary that we use. I remember we taught anointing of the sick for a whole class period, and then the next class we come in and asked them if they knew what anointing was, and they said, "What's that mean?" They didn't even know what the word anointing means. So it's hard to know what anything we said came across. If they don't even know the title of what we're teaching. So I think that kind of need can only be addressed at at an extremely local level, right? Joe and I will have to consistently pause and say, "Do you guys understand? The word we're using, etc." So I think Joe's point also about if the Pope emphasized catechesis as important, then people would pay more attention to it. And I think maybe we'd even have more catechizers, right? If the Pope said, this is an urgent need, people of the church, they need people to. There's a huge need, and so people will step up and fill it. I think that would be a great way to kind of address what is potentially a problem in a lot of places.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think it's not a big V vocation, but I think it's a small V vocation to be a catechist. I think it falls a lot really under the umbrella of a lot of the other vocations, right? As a catechist, which I think the word more or less translates to just teacher. In right, I don't know if y'all want to correct me on that, you're fine because you definitely know a lot more about vocabulary than I do.
No, that's perfect. Teachers, sound down is the literal etymology, but that's what my Greek studies got me.
Right. Well, I'm glad I have you guys for backup on that matter. I think that falls under the umbrella of a lot of the other vocations, right? As a parent, right, you're supposed to teach your kids about the faith. As a priest or religious, you're supposed to teach your spiritual children about the faith. So, yeah, I think an emphasis on that from high up would do a lot more to change enthusiasm and kind of drive in the ground level, right? All right, to kind of end off on this note, you guys have obviously we've mentioned it quite a few times during our time here, but you guys have worked as catechists, have volunteered as catechists before. Do you guys have any words of encouragement for anybody that's kind of looking at that and kind of maybe considering it?
Okay, sorry. I couldn't tell if I was muted or not. I guess one point I'd like to make that really ties in with what you just said, Germ, is what you said about this is a vocation. Maybe not the whole of your vocation, but definitely a part. And I think it is an important part. This is God's command, Jesus' command before he left Earth was to go and make disciples of all nations.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a full-time student who can't go to all nations,
Right.
then you've got to do it right where you are.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a way to do that, to make people disciples, to make people students, and to teach them as best you can. And I think that's a really important part of our vocation in general. But then also, it's not so grandiose, right? I think it's important to realize that this quote is eminently practical, right? Go and make disciples of all nations is something that you can do. Just a place to start is through catechesis, going to a classroom every week, even if you're a little discouraged. Just go and be there, and just try your best every week, and that's enough to start on Jesus' command before he left this earth. So that would be my last words on the matter.
Joe, final closing statement.
Yeah, I guess for me the main thing would be to emphasize that this is doable, and really it isn't. It doesn't take sort of incredible gifts, because that was something that I think I wondered about when I was considering doing it. Was can I do this? Can I teach? Do I know the stuff well enough to teach it to others? And I think, the answer is yes. And I think the answer for many, many people is yes. And that, yeah. So if you are considering doing it, but you don't think that you perhaps have everything you need, go try it out. See for yourself. And maybe you don't, but then you'll know, and then you'll know where you need to grow in order to be able to do it.
Yeah, very well said. Very well said, both of you. I think for myself, something that I would say to anybody that's encouraging to encourage anybody that's thinking about it is that this will make you a better person in the long run. It'll be fulfilling for you, like, for your own person and your own faith life, because it is in giving that we receive, as cliche as that sounds. But in giving of yourself and the resources that you have to teach others about the faith, you'll learn more about your own faith, and you'll bring more people along with you on that journey. And I think that's just an incredible thing that we're able to do as disciples of the risen Lord. Patrick, Joe, thank you guys so much for showing up here and starting off this project with a bang. Next up, episode 2, we have Kateri and Sam, 2 other very good friends of mine. I'm sure they'll have a lot of input on the matter as well.
Hey there, loyal listener. I'm Germ, the host and creator of the Catholit podcast. If you like what you heard, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Still want more? You can find a whole blog's worth of my thoughts on just about anything faith-related at catholit.weebly.com. Thanks for listening, and God bless.